The Blazers' schedule for next season dropped yesterday, and I'm always excited for a brand new season schedule. However, this year's schedule annoys me a bit, and I'm gonna get into why. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I already recorded this once, but my mic was off, so this is take number 2. That sucks. And there's things in this schedule that kinda suck as well. What's crazy is this is my 5th schedule breakdown I've ever done. The first one I did was all the way back in 2018. So over the years, I've developed a bit of a process for doing these schedule breakdowns. If you've been watching me for a while, you probably already know that process, but I will explain it in a second. First, you guys know I like to go all out with graphics, so I created some cool graphics for this video, and in our Discord server, which has a link in the description box below, I have the Blazers schedule with graphics in a thread for you guys to go and check. And without further ado, let's jump into things. I'm breaking them down month by month. Here is the month of October. Now, as far as the metrics at the bottom, I'm looking at games, including how many are at home and how many are on the road, which is away. I'm looking at back-to-backs. I'm looking at how many instances they have at least 2 days rest before a game. And then as far as the two numbers on the right, which are SOS and ADJ, that stands for strength of schedule and adjusted strength of schedule. What I did is I took every NBA team and gave them a projected win total for next season. I then gauged the Blazers' strength of schedule by month based on the quality of opponent that they'll play. Say they had a month where they played all teams that are 41 and 41 or 500 level teams, the Blazers' strength of schedule in that month would be 500. If they played teams that only won 40% of their games, their strength of schedule would be 0.400. The adjusted strength of schedule on the far right takes into account a couple other factors. One of those is home and road splits. Looking back over time, the home team wins about 60% of their games, so I adjusted for that, and I also adjusted for how many rest days the Blazers had before, including back-to-backs, which would make games harder, and 2 days rest, which would hypothetically make games a little bit easier. With that being said, let's take a look at the schedule. The Blazers on opening night faced the Sacramento Kings on the road. Of course, they opened last season against the Sacramento Kings at home. I'm a little bit annoyed by this. Opening night is always a big time moment. I remember a lot of opening night games from years past. And last season, I don't remember many games, but I remember the game against the Kings. Harrison Barnes went off for like a million threes and the Blazers lost. Almost brought it back right there at the end with a steal, but didn't get the job done. I don't know why the Blazers have to open the season against the Kings once again. I would have liked to have mixed it up a little bit, but that doesn't really matter. Second game of the season, the first home game. The home opener is against the Phoenix Suns. The Blazers played the Suns at home early in last year's schedule, and they blew out the Suns in that game, winning by almost 30. Sadly, that's kind of where the season peaked. Blazers then faced the Los Angeles Lakers for the first time on the road, a 12:30 p.m. tip-off time on October 23rd. Then they have a 4-game homestand, starting off against the Denver Nuggets, the Miami Heat, and then facing rookie Jabari Smith for the first time on October 28th. All in all, this is a pretty average opening schedule. You have some tough games against the Suns, potentially the Lakers, the Heat, and the Nuggets. If the Blazers are for real this year, though, the Kings and Rockets games are contests that they should win. Now let's jump into November, which is just absolutely insane. The Blazers play 16 games in the month of November. They have 3 back-to-backs. Now, I think last year the Blazers also played 16 games in November, but had 6 back-to-backs, so at least it's not as many. And just like November of last year, November this year is an extremely difficult for the Blazers, where they will have 11 of their 16 games on the road, only 5 games at home. They finish up that 4-game homestand I was talking about with Memphis on the 2nd. That game will be on ESPN. The Blazers only have 3 nationally televised games. Then they embark on a 6-game road trip. The first 2 games of that road trip are against the Phoenix Suns in Phoenix. This is the second and third matchups against the Suns in the first 9 games. The Blazers then don't play the Suns after that for the rest of the entire season, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Honestly, I hate when the NBA schedules consecutive games against the same team. It's something that they do occasionally, maybe once a year, 5 years ago, but in the past 5 years, they have trended towards making this more of a common thing. Luckily, in previous years, the Blazers have kind of avoided it. I believe last year there was only 3 instances where the Blazers faced the same team twice in a row. However, this year, they will have that happen 5 times. I'm just not a fan of that. This isn't baseball. You shouldn't have 2-game series against the same team. What's also ridiculous about this road trip that'll come into play in future road trips in this schedule is the Blazers, after playing back-to-back nights in Phoenix, then fly all the way across the country to Miami. That's their second matchup against Miami. In the first 10 games, they play the Suns or Heat 5 of those 10 games. But the problem I have with this road trip is they face Miami and Charlotte, 2 Eastern Conference teams, and then come back to facing Western Conference opponents. The Blazers have 15 games every year that they have to make a trip out to the East Coast. Being in Portland, Oregon, that's a really long travel time, and it's hard to adjust living in Portland to then playing games on the East Coast. Therefore, it's always been my opinion that it's better for the Blazers to not have to make as many trips out to the East Coast. If they're going to go out to the East Coast, they should knock off a third of their Eastern Conference road slate by playing 5 Eastern Conference teams. Yes, that's a longer road trip, but it gives them time to adjust to being on the East Coast, and for the most part, that's what's happened in the past. However, that's just not the case this year. So 2 Eastern Conference road trip games sandwiched by 2 games against Western Conference opponents. The Blazers finish off this brutal 6-game and 9-day road trip in New Orleans and Dallas. Games against Western Conference opponents. Those are going to be interesting games that could truly matter later on in the season. The Blazers then come home for an interesting homestand as they play the San Antonio Spurs, who are blowing it up. They then face the Brooklyn Nets and the Utah Jazz. Now, in regards to predicting strength of schedule, I had no idea what to do with Brooklyn and Utah, as there are trade rumors around Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell. So these games could be a little bit easier, could be a little bit harder than I envision them right now. Who knows what happens with both of those teams. The Blazers then go on an Eastern Conference road trip. Luckily, they get 4 Eastern Conference road trip games out of the way as they play the Bucks, the Cavs, the Knicks, and the Nets once again. They then finish off the month against the Clippers and the Lakers. This strength of schedule is the hardest month the Blazers have. Their quality of opponent is extremely high, and then when you adjust for the fact that they play 3 back-to-backs and 11 of the 16 games on the road, this is an insanely tough month. We're going to see what the Portland Trail Blazers are made of depending on how they handle this schedule. But once again, just like last year, if the Blazers start slow, it's no reason for panic. They'll be playing a high quality of opponent. Now, of course, things could happen where certain teams are missing some key players. Context is always needed, but as we look at things right now, November is going to be insanely difficult. Let's jump into December, where the Blazers still have a more road-heavy slate. They play 13 games in December, 8 of which come on the road. Luckily, they don't have as many back-to-backs, only 2, and they also have 4 instances of 2 days rest. Their quality of opponent is also a bit easier, starting off the month in Utah with the Utah Jazz. The Blazers then finally get some home games: Indiana, Denver, and then Minnesota twice in a row. There's another one of those back-to-back consecutive games against the same team. The Blazers then start a 6-game road trip. Luckily, they won't be flying a lot on this road trip as they play the 3 Texas teams in 4 nights: San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. They then play consecutive games against the Oklahoma City Thunder. They then finish things off in Denver, so a 6-game road trip, but not a lot of flight miles for the Portland Trail Blazers. Some key games of note there. Minnesota will be interesting as they went big with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. The Blazers went small. Dallas, it'll be interesting to see how they're doing at this point in the season on December 16th after trading for Christian Wood and losing Jalen Brunson. I think that the Mavericks offseason could backfire, so there might be a little bit of turmoil bubbling to the surface around this time for them. And then 2 games against OKC. That'll be my first chance to see my Portland Trail Blazers play against Chet Holmgren, who's a guy that I'm a huge fan of as a Gonzaga fan. The Blazers then play only 2 games in the course of a week to end this month around Christmas. After playing the Nuggets on the 23rd, they have 2 days of rest before playing the Hornets on the 26th. Then they have 3 days off before they go on the road to face the Golden State Warriors. Overall, this month is easier than November. It's still road heavy, but you do have some easier games against teams like OKC twice, Houston, San Antonio, Indiana, and Charlotte. Now, before we head into January, all these early road games just mean that there's some home games coming up. And in January, 11 of their 15 games will come in Moda Center. They have 2 back-to-backs, 2 stretches of 2 days rest, and they get 3 of their 4 road games out of the way early on in this month of January. First off, the month starts at home against the Detroit Pistons. First chance to see the Blazers play Jaden Ivey, the 5th overall pick, and that'll be Jeremy Grant going up against his former team. You then have a 3-game road trip that is manageable. No back-to-backs. You got the T-Wolves, the Pacers, and the Raptors. Once again, 2 Eastern Conference teams on a road trip. Then the Blazers come home on January 10th. That'll be your one and only chance to see first overall pick Paolo Banchero play in person. And this game against Orlando kicks off a stretch where 10 out of 11 games are at home for the Blazers. Once again, consecutive games against the Dallas Mavericks on the 14th and 15th. Their one road game during the stretch is at Denver, so they don't have to travel far for that. And you'll have some pretty good games, in my opinion, against the likes of Philadelphia, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Toronto Raptors. The Hawks are improved this year after trading for DeJounte Murray. The Cleveland Cavaliers aren't a team to be slept on. They looked good last year as well. You have some really competitive home games to potentially see in person during this stretch. Now, the strength of opponent in general is slightly below average, and then when you adjust for the fact that the Blazers are playing a lot of their games at home, this is a month where the Blazers should make some serious headway. This might be a make or break month for the Portland Trail Blazers. Let's take a look at February, where the Blazers only play 11 games. That is because they have 9 days off over the course of the All-Star break between February 14th and February 23rd. They start things off with a 3-game road trip, including another stretch where they only play 2 Eastern Conference teams on the road. That is probably the most annoying thing about this schedule. However, the Blazers do come home and have a 5-game homestand that has some quality opponents. You got the Bucks making their one trip to Portland on February 6th, Golden State on the 8th. Your first chance, and definitely my first chance, to see Chet Holmgren in person against the Blazers on February 10th. And then to finish off things before the All-Star break, the Lakers and the Wizards. This is a homestand that I think the Blazers should go 4-1 in. That would be a successful homestand. Of course, who knows what the season looks like at this point. Hopefully it doesn't go like last year did. The Blazers then kick things off after the All-Star break in Sacramento, just like they kick off the season in Sacramento. Then they got Houston, Golden State to end the month. This is a slightly below average strength of schedule, pretty even home and road split. Only 2 back-to-backs, and one of those comes right before the All-Star break. Honestly, this is a pretty manageable schedule for the Portland Trail Blazers. Now let's take a look at the final full month, which is March, which has 16 games, just like November does. But unlike November, they have more home games. 9 of the 16 are at home. They do have 3 back-to-backs in this schedule, and the strength of opponent is much easier than November. So although they play 16 games, once again, this month is much different than November. They start things off with the New Orleans Pelicans on March 1st. That'll be CJ McCollum's first game of the season back in Moda Center. That game is also being televised on ESPN. The Blazers play the Pelicans on the 1st, 12th, and 27th during the month of March. So lots of late season games against the Pelicans, who could be battling with the Blazers for playoff positioning. The Blazers then have a pretty massive road trip. From March 3rd to March 12th, the Blazers will play 6 road games, 5 of which come against Eastern Conference opponents. They start things off in Atlanta against the Hawks. Orlando on the 5th, that should be a winnable game, as I expect them to be tanking at this point. Same thing with the Detroit Pistons on March 7th. That'll be Jeremy Grant's first chance to play against his former team in his former city. Then on the second night of a back-to-back, a very difficult game, the Blazers head into Boston for their first matchup of the season against the defending Eastern Conference champions. Philadelphia on March 10th and the Pelicans on March 12th to wrap up the road trip. The Blazers then come home for 8 out of 9 games. The only road game is March 22nd against the Utah Jazz. I have no idea what they'll look like at this point. That could be a really easy game. So this is another stretch from March 14th to the end of the month where the Blazers can make some serious headway. They got matchups against the Thunder, the Knicks, the Kings twice in a row, and then they got some winnable contests against the Bulls as well as the Pelicans. The Celtics and Clippers are going to be tough games, but coming at home, maybe they can get those as well. Overall, this month has a slightly below average strength of schedule, so once again, the Blazers could make some headway here. And let's look at April, which only has 5 games, 4 of which come on the road. 3 of them come against projected Western Conference playoff teams. That's the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies, as well as the Los Angeles Clippers. You do have the Spurs in there on April 6th, and then to finish off the season, the Golden State Warriors on April 9th. That could be a game where the Blazers are playing to avoid a play-in spot or playing for playoff positioning that the Golden State Warriors will probably not care about. I expect them to be good enough where they don't really have anything to play for there. Out of the final 5 games, 3 of them have an early schedule time right now, 12:30 on the 2nd and 9th, and then 1 p.m. tip-off time on April 8th. The game on the 9th could get moved back. They do tend to move around start times on the final day of the regular season. Now let's look at how every month stacks up against each other. As I said, the schedule is very, very tough over the first 22 games or so. Things then get much easier December through March. Over the first 39 games of the season, the Blazers will play 15 home games and 24 road games. That stretches through January 8th, where things get much easier after that. The goal for the Blazers is just going to be to hang on over the month of November, just try and stay close to 500. Something I've done in years past is I've taken the strength of schedule and projected what a 50-win pace could look like given the Blazers' strength of schedule. Obviously, if you're a good team but you're facing a bunch of contenders early in the season, you might start off at 500, and then when you face some bottom feeders, then you'll start picking up a lot of wins and end up with maybe a 50-win season. So with that being said, let's look at the 50-win pace for the Blazers this season, given strength of schedule. Now, this isn't to say that being 9-13 after November is necessarily a good thing. If the Blazers are dealing with injuries and start off 9-13, then there should be nothing to worry about. But if the Blazers are getting some injury luck, facing some teams with some key guys missing, and they start off 9-13, then I'd be a little bit more worried. So context is important with this. I did not come up with any of these numbers. These were fed back to me based on the math of everything. But yeah, it's not a problem if the Blazers are only a couple games below 500 at the end of November, given how tough that month is. Nobody should panic if the Blazers are 9-13. I know some people will, but I'll reference this video back to argue against that. Then if the Blazers are a high quality team, they should pick up a ton of wins in December and January. That would see them going 22-6 over those months, including 6-5 in February and 11-5 in March. This looks just like last year. Of course, last year, other circumstances led to the Blazers tanking their easy late season schedule. So it's almost like the NBA said, let's run it back and see if you guys can actually try and make the playoffs with this. I also took a look at the pace of a projected 500 record, and that would see the Blazers being 5-17 after November. Basically, out of the first 22 games, only 5 of them you would expect a 500 caliber team to win. This is just another way to illustrate how tough the schedule is to start the season for your Portland Trail Blazers. Anyway, that's a wrap for the schedule breakdown. Hopefully you enjoyed. Let me know what some key games for you are down in the comment section below. What matchups are you looking the most forward to? What do you think of our schedule as a whole? What do you think of how many trips the Blazers have to make out to the East Coast? And what do you think about consecutive games against the same team? Because that's something that truly does annoy me. Anyway, I'm truly excited for another season of Blazers basketball. Hopefully you are as well. We'll have you covered right here on Blazers Uprise. Until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.